You're listening to The Art of Imperfect Adulting. I'm your host, Amy Stone. Here, I share stories from real people navigating the adventure that I call adulting. Are you ready? Me too. Let's do this. Well, hello, friends. How are you today? In this episode, I'm going to introduce you to my guest, Kristina Heagh-Avritt. And we talk about school choice. Kristina is a mom, and she's also a teacher. She taught for 28 years. And after 28 years of teaching, she left her job as a teacher and started her own business. We talk about how and why she made this decision. So a lot of the things that influence Kristina's decision are things you may have heard about from other people. This is not my first conversation about school choice, and I'm sure it's not yours either. But I asked Kristina a few questions that I think you might find interesting. She shares that there was pressure for her to teach to the test. And I asked Kristina to share what her curriculum was like before that shift. I think that's a really interesting thing to think about because from my perspective, I've never actually been a teacher. And so while I've heard people talk about the pressure to teach to the test, it's not something that I can explain for myself because it's not something I've ever done. So I really like that opportunity to hear from someone who is on both sides of it. This is a good conversation and I'm happy to share it with you today. So let's get to it. Kristina Heagh-Avritt, welcome to The Art of Imperfect Adulting. I'm so happy you're here. Are you ready for a fun chat?
I am absolutely ready for a fun chat. Thank you for having me here.
Yay! I'm happy you're here too. I begin all of my conversations with my guests with the exact same question. What part of the world do you call home?
Southern Oregon in the United States.
Ooh, wow. Okay. So I've spent a lot of time in Oregon recently because I have a member of the family who's living there. So are you whereabouts in Southern Oregon are you? I've been to Crater Lake. That's the most southern I've been to.
And that is perfect because I am about 45 minutes down from Crater Lake towards Medford.
Medford. Okay. So I know exactly where that is. So we stayed, I have not been to Medford. Does Medford have a cheese festival?
I don't
No.
think
Okay, so
so,
I
but
messed it up.
maybe.
So maybe. All right. So we went to Crater Lake and we stayed in Klamath Falls because that was I wasn't able to get into the lodge at Crater Lake. Anyway, sorry, off topic already. I apologize. Next warm
No
up
problem.
question. If the weather is snowy and cold outside, do you enjoy outdoor activities or not? And if you do, what do you like to do outside in the cold weather?
So actually, when it's snowy and cold, I love staying inside and watching the snow fall. But if I do go outside, I love those evening walks when it's just bright and crisp and super quiet and
Oh,
amazing.
all
Hmm.
right. I love that answer. That's very good. Okay, so in this conversation, we're not going to talk about how beautiful Oregon is, but it is. Everybody should visit. You and I are going to talk about school choice and education through the lens of your personal experience. Are you ready to have that conversation today?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it. So I think from the information that you gave me that you were a teacher for a very
Yeah.
long time. My first question is actually personal, and if it's too personal, tell me to buzz off. Are you also a parent of kids, or is your experience as a teacher just what we're talking about?
No, I had 27 years in the classroom as a teacher, and I raised two boys of my own.
Okay, so you've got experience both as an educator and as someone who's shepherding your own children through the education system.
And as a mother of a special needs child, so I went through
Mm.
the full gamut of all the IEPs, special meetings as a teacher, as a parent, raising, helping, all that stuff. Yep.
All right. So I think this is a really valuable discussion because one of the things that can happen in any system, not just education, is you've got people who, the experience of being a parent sometimes doesn't match the experience of being a teacher. And we've got two people with, overlapping responsibilities with different experience. It's just very hard for everybody to understand the other side when you haven't know. Yeah. So, but you've got
Absolutely.
your own personal experience on both sides, which in the education world does happen a lot. A lot of teachers are also parents. Okay, so you mentioned this, almost 3 decades.
Yeah.
So
And
did you have
yeah.
a specialty? And if so, what was it? What age range? What subject matter? Tell us about what your experience was like.
My favorite grade levels were second and third grade, and that's where I spent most of my 27-year career was in that age group. So those 7, 8, 9 year olds, they're just absolutely amazing. They're the cute ones who are like ready to learn and they have enough skills to actually produce and do some things, and they're still super, super curious, and they aren't to the point where they're still starting to express their independence and get kind of mouthy. It's like, I don't want to do that kind of thing. So that second, third grade age is absolutely perfect.
And second grade is like an expanding curriculum, right? It's not like a reviewing year, which some curriculums have a reviewing year. Second grade can be tough.
It can. It's one of
Second,
the biggest growth years in reading for most
yeah.
students is second grade. And then of course, third grade is that transition year where you've learned all of your reading skills and now you're putting all those skills to work in third grade. So those two grades are very, very crucial.
And so were you general, both reading and math?
General ed in our state is everything. So I taught reading, science, math, history, everything except for PE and music and library.
All right, I love it. Okay, so if you may have actually answered this with the last question, but I want to confirm if you were in like a public school, a private school, urban, suburban, rural, what was the environment?
So I was in a public school. It was actually the fifth largest school district in the state. So it's a pretty big school district. But
Okay.
the funny thing about that is when I started my career, I was in one of the smallest school districts in the state. And then partway through my career, we were forced by the state to combine into big districts. So then I became part of that bigger district, and things changed a lot between the two different kinds of districts.
And so it sounds like when this happened, you didn't actually change locations. It was the restructuring of the district around you. That's a really interesting, I bet you that was a really interesting experience.
It was a very interesting experience.
All right, so I'm going to zoom out. So we now have talked about your experience, professional, like sort of resume level experience about it, but I want to zoom out. When you were a kid, did you enjoy school?
I did. I loved school for the academics. So a lot of people say they love school because of the social and the friends and everything. I love school for the academics. The craziest thing about school was I had an hour-long bus ride every morning and every night. So I became an avid bookworm because I just needed something to do for an hour each day.
Oh, I believe it. All right, so what was your favorite subject in school?
Uh, Definitely reading. Yeah, reading and language arts.
All
Yep.
right, very good. All right, now here's one. This is a fun one. Can you remember the name of a favorite teacher in middle school or high school?
Oh, darn. I wish you were talking elementary.
You
Okay,
can
so
do
middle.
elementary. I like the,
Okay.
but yeah, so you can do elementary if that's the one that pops to mind.
It is. It's my second grade teacher because she was my inspiration to become a teacher. When I was 8 years old, I literally walked up to that teacher and said, Mrs. Reynolds, when I grow up and become a teacher, I'm going to come and I'm going to take your place. And she's
Oh
like,
my goodness.
what? I'm like, yes, absolutely. And so then I actually got to work with her for a year. My first teaching assignment was back in my original elementary school. She was still teaching for one more year. I got to teach in the same building as her and I helped her retire.
Oh, I love that. I love that circular. Oh, that's so good. I have this theory that one of the things that draws people to teaching is sometimes that they really enjoyed school, right? So, like, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that people who don't enjoy school are like, I'm going to go do something else, you know? And I think that works out too. Okay, so then this is the story. How old were you when you said that to Mrs. Reynolds? How old were you when you decided that what you want to do was be a teacher?
I was 8, but
8.
I
And it
knew
never
before
changed?
then. Nope, never changed.
All right. That's very okay. And so, what was it about being a teacher? What was your motivation and inspiration? You don't have to say at 8 years old because it would probably change. But when you think back to the things that were pushing you and encouraging you and drawing you into this field as an educator, what were the things that were there? What was your motivation?
I think a lot of it had to do with helping other people, and just knowing that the children I could impact and help grow and change and be confident and stuff. When I started school, I wasn't very confident, and I grew into my confidence and my capabilities with great teachers. And so that was part of it. And then just seeing because light bulbs go off, when you're watching a little kid and they finally get something, their eyes pop open and you can almost literally see that little cartoon bubble light bulb above their head going, I got it, right?
Yeah.
And so those kinds of things were the best things in the world, as well as helping families understand what the education process was.
Right. Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that because that's something that's near and dear to your heart. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, Then this is perfect because my very next question touches on that. Sometimes it just works out super well, Kristina. Okay, so in your pitch, you wrote that you believed that you could love kids through the cracks in the system. And you kept thinking, if I just try harder, if I just give more, I can make this work. And so when I read that, that sounds to me like over time, this idea of helping people and being in the role of someone giving light bulb moments with the kids became sort of challenging, disgruntled, disenchanted maybe with the actual experience and with the job. So I was wondering if you would share a little bit more with us about what were the experiences, what was going on that was changing how you felt about this experience? Because 3 decades is a long time to be committed to a career.
Thank you for asking that question, because this is where people don't really understand a lot of what's happening. Our education system, and it's kind of cliche, but it is broken. It's not serving our children or all of our children the way it needs to be. And through that 27 years of teaching, I went from a place where I was connected with the children. I was excited to be with them every single day. Matter of fact, my husband loves telling the story of that. At the beginning of my career, I would cry at the end of the year because my kids were graduating and moving up to the next grade level. By the time I got to the end of my teaching career, I was actually crying several times throughout the school year because I was not able to reach the children. I was not able to serve them the way they needed to be served. I was not able to do what I needed to really help them. And a lot of that had to do with policies and administration, and unfortunately a disconnect between teachers and parents. So a little bit about that. The policies, we were suddenly teaching to the test. The last 10 years of my career is like, I don't care what you're teaching, you need to be on this page, on this day, on this chapter, and this. And it's like, my students are not ready for that. It's like, it doesn't matter. They have to know this information to get to the test. It's like, that's not the way I teach. So again, trying to be there and, work through and around everything to give them what they need and still not, fulfill my contract kind of thing.
So I want to pause there for a little second and ask you for a little bit more information, because I think that this is I've never been a teacher. In fact, right, I really enjoyed the social aspect of school. Recess and art were my favorite subjects. But I never was a person. I always thought that the job of being a teacher looked like it was very hard. So like when I was in college and I had friends who were like, I want to be a teacher. And I was like, oh my God, why? And they were like, oh, it looks great. And I was like, no, that looks really hard to me. And so before you were teaching to the test, this is the question. Before you were teaching to the test, for people who are not teachers, who have not got this experience, what then did the curriculum look like? Like, what was the difference? What did it look like? How you were making the plan for the year before they came out with the rigid guidelines of teaching to the test?
It was very much based on what the students need. So there was a basic overall second grade curriculum, right?
Okay.
But if a group of my students was a little bit slower or not quite to where they would needed to be, I could spend a little bit more time on that section that they need to become more proficient at. If a group of students was, or a whole classroom came in and they were a little bit lower on reading, I was able to give more emphasis to the reading and back off on a few other things until they kind of like caught up. I had much more flexibility in meeting the students' needs and helping them feel confident and secure in their learning, besides just being on this page, this and this. And I was also able to do it more thematically so that I could bring in interest of the students. I could say, oh, most of the kids in the class like tigers. Awesome. Let's do a few weeks on tigers and integrate a few things back and forth. So that high interest learning was there as well. But then they came back with, no, you have to teach out of this science book. You have to teach out of this reading book. You have to teach out of this math book. So yeah, it was a change from being, here's the guidelines, make sure you're filling them, to here's the book, follow the page, do what it says.
And as a teacher, what are the consequences? What were the penalties or consequences if you were not able to stay on the teach the test program?
Oh, let's see.
Not like that you're not choosing, but it's like the kids are not able to do it, and then you're like, I have to move on to So
yeah. So all of my reviews went down because I wasn't following the specific plan and protocol. The principal was constantly like, well, why aren't your kids achieving at this and this and this? And when I would try to say, because they don't have the foundations to meet that, they would say, no, you haven't taught it yet. You're supposed to be on this page. I was like, no, there's more factors going into this than just that. So, and just a feeling of, my own self doubt, kind of like, okay, well, maybe I'm just not doing it the way. But it's like, no, after 25, 26 years of teaching, I knew what my students needed. Yeah.
And I think that that's the reason I appreciate you letting me ask for more information
Yeah.
there, because I never in my life have made a lesson plan.
Mhm.
I all I have, and I think this is true for many people who have children in the education system across the board. What we have is we have our own individual experience, whatever it was in school, and then our kids go through a different experience. But and it is wild because education does change, right? So like, and I don't have a reading example for this, but doing math with the
Mhm.
four kids that went through my house, it's so funny because like, we do math, and I'm like, now one of the younger ones, they would ask like these questions for explanations about math, which I don't think anybody ever asked me for an explanation about math. And I'm doing math with one of the little kids in my house, and it's like, explain the reason for this answer. And this is elementary. This is three
Yes.
plus four equals seven. And I
Yes.
was like, it was, and I was like, he's like, what's the reason, mom? And I was like, I, I don't know, addition. I don't like, no one's ever asked me a question like this. And what I didn't realize at the time doing this homework, because they were sending home worksheets, which were from a book, that if I had had, that it was vocabulary, if I had had the entire book, they were looking for the answer a couple pages back. So it's not like a super crazy question,
Mhm.
but to be doing it at home at the living room table or the kitchen table and like looking at it, and I was just like, oh my God, I don't know. How can I not be able to help my elementary? So anyway, I think that both sides of the experience are really valid, and it can be hard. It has been hard for me as a parent to have any sort of idea why schools are making the decisions they're making. I have no idea why they were asking for this vocabulary. I'm sure somebody somewhere had a reason, but I don't have it. All right. So I did interrupt you because you were talking about the cracks in the system. So we talked a little bit about the administration in the system, and that was causing frustration. What else was going on over time? And that was causing disenchantment. And how far into your teaching career did this start to happen? Like, is there a time where there was a foundational shift, or was it just slow chinks in the armor as you went through?
It was mostly slow chinks in the armor as I went through, but it got really intense the last 10 years. So that was really, really intense there. Part of it was the administration had changed. I had a principal that wasn't very supportive, which was really hard. And then on top of that, like I said, teaching to the test, and then societal changes in some ways. There are so many awesome, amazing parents out there, but they have become enchanted or unenchanted with the idea that they don't have to be part of the school or help at school. Matter of fact, there are many schools, especially in my area, that had pushed parents away. It's like, oh no, you can't come in and help in the classroom very much. Oh, you have to wait for these specific times to come and help. And I know it was a safety issue in some ways where they started doing background checks and
Yeah.
things, but then they ratcheted it up even higher to fingerprints and everything else. And they put up so many barriers to parents coming in. And those parents should be welcomed in with open arms so they can do exactly what you were saying, hear the vocabulary, see how the kids are learning, understand that connection between home and teacher, right?
Yeah.
And there was a really big situation that happened where the office kind of started suddenly saying, oh, well, teachers, you don't really have to contact the parents too much. We'll take care of everything. If there's an issue at school, we'll contact them. If there's something that the child's having struggles with, we'll contact them. And I was basically told not to talk to my parents. And that, again, was a major problem because I always had loved and adored those conversations. I had loved that connection because especially when the teacher and the parent are on the same page, on the same team, so many better, beautiful things can happen for the child.
So yeah, and especially we're talking, keeping in mind for everybody who's listening and watching, this is second grade we're talking about, because like there's a different conversation when you've got high schoolers and you're trying to let them be independent and do all their own stuff. Second graders are not yet independent. They cannot fully manage the lunchbox. They,
No.
they need help. Yeah, that is definitely that is something that has shifted because schools have had, they have made changes to deal with security concerns from parents and things like that. But it has definitely had the impact that, the doors that were open have gates in front of them. And I absolutely had to go through security checks to do what did they call it? Like where you go and bring the kids lunch and read them
Yeah.
books in elementary school.
Yeah.
Or, in kindergarten, there was sign up to cut paper into a million pieces for God
Yeah.
knows
The
what they were
parent
doing.
helper. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but yeah, you do have to go through that. And it does create an obstacle that is that, I mean, it depends on the school, but yeah, it's definitely a process. And I will admit that until you said that, I'd never really thought about the fact that it does mean that there's less people walking around who will help at a drop of a hat.
Yeah.
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 So, and I don't think they had that experience. I don't think that the teachers were told to go through the administration at any of the schools that I went to. But one of the things that I lived through was instead of notes coming home in the backpack, right?
Uh-huh.
So then people would email us, and then every single teacher had like their own individual app that they were
Yeah.
asking us to sign up for. And I remember, and I just like my kids were almost done. And I remember I went in, I was like, so I just want to let you know, I'm not doing any of this
Right.
because they're old enough to do, they were older than second
Yeah.
grade, like,
Exactly.
right. And I was like, I'm not signing up for any of these apps. I do not have it in my, if you need me, please call me,
Here's my phone number.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And a friend of mine who has got young kids now, and she was complaining, and I was like, okay, so just so you know, I didn't actually play that game. And she was like, what? And I was like, they know how to reach you if they actually need, some money or your and she was like, I don't know if that would work. And I was like, I don't know either. It did work for me. So and I don't mean that to be unsupportive or disrespectful to
Right.
the teachers who are out there doing that, because I think the flip side of that, which is that you're saying, is that they're rolling out what they need to run their classroom.
Mhm.
And but then when you think about it from a Zoom, why would every single one need to have their own separate thing? Like it should be, that means there's not support for them either.
Right, exactly. Yeah, when we were told to go digital with so many things, and this was very, very apparent during the pandemic, when we were told to go digital, there wasn't a here's a digital
Right.
suite in a box that our school's going to use. Instead of
Yeah.
like, make sure that you're contacting your parents in all these different ways. And the teachers were like, okay, so now on top of everything, to reading, writing, math, everything else, I had to be a tech expert and know how to do this, which I was the technology person in my school for 15 years. So I had to help these teachers roll these kinds of things out. And it's like, okay, guys, let's see if we can streamline this a little bit.
And the pandemic really, it created a lot of situations that nobody was ready for. And it again, it depends on where your kids were. My kids were older; they were in middle school, high school, and college when we went into lockdown. But I tell this story all the time. A friend of mine who has had his kid in preschool called me, and he was like, "How am I supposed to work and help my kid with online school and preschool?" And I was like, "I'm sorry, what?"
Yeah.
Like, why are we doing online preschool? The entire point of preschool is that everybody sits in the same room and the parent gets the preschool is only 2 hours long. Like, it's like you get their 2 hours off, I was like, he's like, I've already paid for it. And I was like, okay.
Right.
But he don't
Exactly.
expect a preschooler to hold their own iPad to do sing along time.
Yep.
So yeah. All right. So technology administration support.
Mhm.
And what was that mostly wrapped up in that change of administration where you went from one rural independent school district to being a part of a bigger.
No, that had happened way back at the beginning of my career when that happened. So I had already been in the bigger system for quite a while. So the bigger system just kept getting bigger.
And then was there like a new principal that came in that you just did not see eye to eye with kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah, that was part of it as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
and our little school had been through boundary changes and a whole bunch of different things, and we'd had like 5 different principals in 4 years, and it was a pretty chaotic time. But I was one of the senior teachers in the building, and so a lot of people looked up to me and said, "Okay, how are we going to keep our little our family together in this school?" And so I was working really hard with the other teachers to help this new principal understand this is the way we've done things. This is the way that works really well for our families. And then there's like, no, an administration comes down, no, things have to change, and just a whole bunch of different things. But I mean, the biggest thing is the parent disconnect. That was so, so hard for so many different people.
And when you mean that, it's just like not being able to work as a team and reach out
Yeah.
directly to the parents
Yeah.
and do that. All right. So Okay, so by the end, you're unhappy with your job, you're feeling disenchanted, you're crying at the beginning of the year, during the year.
Yeah.
You decide to leave the job of teaching in this school at some point. Tell us about whether that was a hard decision for you to make at the time.
It was a very difficult decision because I had known since 8 years old that I was supposed to be a teacher. And in my brain, teacher meant public school in the
Okay.
classroom with kids. So it was a very, very hard. And the other thing was that I was still at my original school that I started teaching in, that I grew up in. So it was not only my teaching career, it was my life, my legacy, everything, all the way back from when I was little. So that was one of the hardest decisions of my life, to make that decision.
So
Yeah.
this is where you went to school. It was where you'd started teaching and been teaching
Yep.
all this time. This is really wrapped up in your identity and also, um, the fabric of your community. Like this is your home
Mhm.
base, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay. And at the time you're doing this, do you still have kids in school or had they made it through?
No, they had made it through already. Yeah,
Okay,
they
so
were
you had
out on
completed,
their own.
they were out. So this was just you thinking of it as a job. It wasn't related to anybody in your, okay.
No.
So do you immediately, when you leave, go into business for yourself, or is there a gap in between?
I actually immediately went into business for myself. And all of that happened around the pandemic. So we like to say that the
Okay.
pandemic, it was so horrible, but at the same time, it was one of those silver linings that helped me really take the step. I've been unhappy for many, many years. But then when the pandemic hit, I had just transferred to our online school. So it
Yeah.
wasn't what everybody else was dealing with. It was an actual online curriculum. I was helping set up the K through 2 system for the littles, and I had, perfect curriculum. I had a great platform. I had all this stuff. I didn't deal with that kind of stuff that the other teachers were dealing with, which I thank my lucky stars every day that I transferred when I did. But the other thing that really shone in there for me and why I started my own business immediately was because I spent part of my time teaching in that online. I spent the other part coaching parents. Exactly the same question you were just asking. How
Right.
do I work when I have this little one running around who needs help? How do I get this lesson to make sense to my child when the videos aren't making sense or whatever? And so I immediately was working with parents on scheduling routines, alternative lesson plans, etc., things to help them and their child not fight and have a horrible experience at home, but have a wonderful experience at home. And when that light bulb went off, along with all of the dissatisfaction, everything that I knew I could do, was like, no, it's time for me to move into my own business and see what I can do to help parents on the home front.
Oh, okay. So that's really so before the pandemic, before lockdown, you were lucky enough that you were already working on a fully online community, the fully
Mm.
online school program,
Yeah.
different from where we took the sticks and bricks schools and we're like everybody
Yes.
log in. The
Yeah.
one of my other favorite stories, because like you said, doing that during lockdown, nobody knew what they were doing, and in some situations, the kids had the upper hand because teachers are teachers and not necessarily online. So in one of our community schools in middle school, and middle school kids are tough, right? Middle schoolers are pushing the boundaries, and
I
middle
swore
school
I would never
kids,
teach there.
middle school teachers, and so they did it like a sort of an orientation meeting with like hundreds of parents and hundreds of students and all of these things. And the kids were better at the technology than the administrators and the parents. And they began drawing like kids, like middle schoolers do on the whiteboard in this online in front of a whole community thing. And parents were embarrassed, and the teachers were just aghast, and everybody was poorly behaved. And I, who was not involved, was able to laugh hilariously at the situation because, it's like that there's graffiti all over every middle school bathroom nationwide
Yep.
that you leave them unattended with a marker, they're going to draw. So, and they're not drawing rocket ships. Okay, so you go into business for yourself. The business is called Vibrant Family Education. And so you are coaching and guiding parents. You're not running a curriculum.
Yeah. I'm not,
Tell us a
no,
little
yeah,
bit.
could,
Tell us what it is. Tell
yeah.
us what it is.
Okay. I am coaching and guiding parents who want that alternative education, something different. So they know that maybe their public school isn't working. They know maybe their charter school isn't working. They're exploring what homeschooling might look like. And I am giving them those basics, those foundations, those accountability steps, those different things that really help them understand what changes might look like and
Yeah.
how to make those changes happen, and if they need support through that. So especially for those who choose to go to homeschooling, now they know that they have me not only as an accountability partner and a mentor to help them with their education part. They also know I've been a parent. They also know I've been in the classroom. So they're not worried about a lot of those gaps that so many homeschoolers are worried about, right? They're thinking, oh, I'm going to miss something and then my child won't have their complete education, et cetera. But more than that, we talk about the whole child and holistic learning. So yes, we talk academics, but then we also go into emotional, spiritual, physical well-being around this child so that they're growing up happy, healthy, and successful.
So it's very interesting. One of the side effects of like everybody going online for education during lockdown is that it fast tracked or accelerated or made people aware of alternative education systems.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some upsides to that. There are some things that people are, I think, a lot of people have complaints about lockdown in general, but a lot of people really got a peek into the education system and got exposed to things that were possible for their family that wouldn't have otherwise been. And like you said, I think back in the 70s and 80s, I don't know that very many people really considered that there was another option. The option was you get up and you go to school and you get what you get and you don't get upset. And
Yeah.
so, and now there not only are there more options, like if you sort of look down the timeline, the skills of online learning jobs are now online too. Like that's how we
Mm-hmm.
work as well. So it's really interesting. Okay, so you say that one of the things you said about vibrant family education, I have a question about. You describe it as
Yeah.
creating joyful, connected, values-based learning at home. And I want to talk a little bit more about what you mean when you say values-based learning. And I'm not going to be secretive or sneaky about it at all. Sometimes the words values-based can be like a sort of code for religion. And so I want to ask you what you're talking about when you talk about values-based. Like, is it for people who are looking for faith-based curriculums, or is it just whatever your values are at home?
Now, it's based on your family's values. Matter of fact, when parents come and work with me, one of the very first things we talk about is what are your family values? You value education, you value religion, maybe you don't value religion, all those different things. And it's all connected around your family values. What do you and your family really value and cherish, and traditions and things like that that really make your family sing? Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's just whatever. That's your way of saying that you work with the family to figure out what works for them, not because you've got a
Mm-hmm.
philosophy or because you're not teaching your curriculum. You're helping
Yeah.
people with a curriculum they do. Does Oregon, so you're based in Oregon. Do they have
Yeah.
is they like Oregon online school that people use, or is it whatever people bring to you as curriculum?
Yeah, there's all the different options. So there is an Oregon online school that they can attend, and then those lots of times come with teachers already, so they don't need someone like me to help them. But then there is tons of textbook, actual
Right.
hardbound curriculum that people use. There are online platforms. Some people use the School of YouTube, and that totally
Yes.
works as well,
Yeah.
depending on how you're using it and things like that. So it's whatever the family kind of wants to use, and then I help them augment it, or I help them figure out, is this really a good fit for your child or not, kind of thing, as we're looking through a curriculum. Mm-hmm.
And is it the kind of thing where if somebody is listening to this or watching, I've had other people talk about, like, I had somebody talk about unschooling, I've had road schooling,
Yeah.
things like that were on. But if somebody's in a situation, which a lot of the people I know who've gone through alternative school choice, it
Mm-hmm.
begins with they're in a situation where what they're trying is not working. They have a kid
Yeah.
in a building and with a teacher, and there's 1,000 different versions of this story. There's no one way. It can be anything from you've got a kid who's got chronic illness or is sick and missing class to fighting, not clicking socially. There's a million different things, and you in this situation. So could somebody come to you at that starting point and you would say, let's look at what the curriculum options are. Like, here's some places that you can find things.
Yes, we would. But before we even do that, we would step back and look at what kind of experience they want them to have. Like you were just saying, there's something called unschooling, there's road schooling, there's world schooling, there's curriculum based schooling, there's all those different things. So before we can even talk about a curriculum, it's more like, okay, wait a minute, what kind of education experience do you want your child to have? Because one of the biggest mistakes that people make is that they think they have to pick up the traditional public school and put it in their living room. And that is so absolutely not true. And if you try to do that, you're probably going to have issues. And people hear me as a past teacher talking like that. It's like, yeah, no, I know, because of everything I've experienced, everything I went through during the pandemic, and helping parents really make the school rhythm routine that fit for them and their families, and all the parents I've helped since then. Yeah, that's not what you do. You really make sure you look at your family rhythm routine and how you want to present things.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that people who ended up with school in their living room during lockdown, as well as their job in the living room, like one person at the kitchen table, one person at the dining room table. I think that's one of the things that people really saw was how much of the time, and this is not this might sound like a critique of traditional school, but it's not actually, but so much of the day in a brick and mortar school is moving around, is organizing the people in the room, is, the work of keeping 10, 20, 30 kids on task. And if you remove those things, then you don't have to do that. If you've got one person at home working on something, it's not that you're skipping anything. It's that you don't have to walk down the hallway when your living room is your classroom. And so you don't have to you don't have to spend a week learning how to line up in order. Yeah. So, all right. Very good. Okay. So you have a special offer for the listeners. It's Education at Home in 10 Simple Steps, an e-book. It's a guide for people who are ready to get started in their homeschooling journey. And there is a link for that in the show notes. And for everybody who wants to get the link easier, be a subscriber to the Imperfect Adulting email community. And the reason it's easier is that then the links are right in your email box and you just click on them. So that is why I think that. I want to thank you very much, Kristina, for that very generous offer. Are you ready for the final 3 questions, my friend?
I am.
All right, let's do it. Earlier, I asked you a question about middle school or high school, but we talked about elementary school. But now I'm going to ask you about middle school or high school because this question doesn't make any sense for elementary school. Thinking back to middle school and high school, what was your favorite band or musical artist?
Oh, golly. That's a really good one. I think it was Duran Duran. Yeah, that
love
sounds
it.
about right.
Yes.
Yep, it's about that time.
All right. Very good. Very good. Okay. We are actually recording this right before the winter holiday gift season. It won't be out till February, but are you a person who shops well in advance for gifts, or are you a last minute holiday shopper?
I try to shop in advance, but there's almost always those 1 or 2 things that happen right at the end.
I am such a last minute shopper. I haven't done any shopping for this year even yet. It's like so funny. All right, very good. If you get a last minute invitation to a holiday party and it has a gift swap, what store are you most likely to go to find a last minute gift?
Wow, that's a good one. It's probably going to be something like Home Goods or Marshalls or something that has lots of eclectic things like candles or teas or lots of different things that I could kind of think of that might be really nice for the people.
Yeah, no, that totally works. I agree with that idea completely. It's not a Home Goods near me, but that's a really, really good store. That's it. Kristina Heagh-Avritt, thank you so much for being a wonderful guest today on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening today. I hope that you enjoy the show. And before I go, I want to encourage you to become a bigger part of the conversation. Obviously, subscribe wherever you're listening to the show. Listen to more episodes. That'd be great. Again, please write a review and tell your friends about the show. That truly is a great help for getting the show in front of new people. Okay, but more fun for you yourself. Head over to imperfectadulting.com and join the email community. You'll get some free stuff right away, and that way you'll begin to get the emails about the podcast. This includes the links for the special offers from the guests, and it's the only way to get that. Also, if you aren't in the mood to listen, I actually include an article directly in those emails. Whee! Now, if you love this and you crave more time with me, Amy, as a coach, a mentor, or just adultier adult, numero uno, check out The Village. If you have a story you want to share with the listeners, I'd love to hear from you. I have an open application. Just let me know you want it. And that's a wrap for today. Until next time, remember, the journey is the destination. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that, not me. Well, until just now, I did just say it. But what I want you to hear today is that if your adulting journey isn't going the way you expected, that may not mean that you're lost. It may just mean that you're on your way. This is Amy Stone, signing off. The Imperfect Adulting podcast is created and produced by Amy Stone and Amy Says So. Anything expressed on this show is offered as entertainment, and the views of the guests may not always represent the ideas and viewpoints of the host. That's me. Amy does not intend or hold herself out to provide professional advice or recommendations of any kind. In the end, you and you alone need to make those kinds of decisions based on your personal and individual situation, needs, circumstances, and comfort level.